Some wounds never heal. They just learn to live quiet. For 62-year-old Fern Maddra, 30 years of solitude in the New Mexico mountains have been her penance for a mistake she can never undo. Then, one frozen morning, she hears a sound that breaks through decades of silence. On a remote trail, an enormous black wolf lies trapped in rusted steel, crying out in pain. Most folks would walk away, but Fern kneels down. What she does next starts something neither of them expected, a connection that will force her to face the family she abandoned and the son she hasn't seen in 3 decades. Could an act of mercy toward a wild creature be the first step toward her own redemption? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat at 9,000 feet, where the ponderosa pines gave way to stands of aspen and Douglas fir. Fern Maddra had built it herself over the course of 2 brutal winters, her hands learning the language of axe and saw, her back growing strong from hauling logs she'd cut and stripped alone. That was 30 years ago, when grief was still fresh and raw, when the only thing that made sense was putting distance between herself and every choice she'd made. Now the cabin felt like an extension of her body. She knew every creak in the floorboards, every gap where the wind slipped through in January. The stone fireplace she'd mortared with clay from the creek bed still drew clean, still kept the single room warm enough that she could sleep without waking to frost on the quilts. In the loft above, accessible by a ladder she'd made from lodgepole pine, she kept her stores, dried beans and flour in mouse-proof tins, her winter clothes, and things she couldn't bear to look at, but couldn't throw away. The hand-carved wooden cradle was up there, wrapped in canvas. James had made it when she was 6 months along with Corey, spending his evenings after work bent over the wood with careful tools, sanding it smooth as river stone. He'd carved a pattern of leaves along the rim, cottonwood leaves, because that's what had been growing outside their first apartment in Alamogordo. The cradle had held their son for the first 8 months of his life. Then Corey grew too big for it, and it went to the loft, waiting for grandchildren that never came. Fern didn't think about the cradle most days. She'd gotten good at not thinking about a lot of things. Her mornings followed a pattern worn smooth by repetition. Up before dawn, fire built from the coals she'd banked the night before. Coffee made strong in the blue enamel pot, drunk black while standing at the window that faced east. She watched the sun come up over the Sacramento mountains, the light turning the high desert gold before it climbed into the pine forests where she lived. Oatmeal cooked with dried apples and a spoonful of honey from the general store in Cloudcroft. She made the 12-mile trip to town once a month, sometimes less in winter. After breakfast, she checked her trap line. Not steel traps, she despised those, but humane box traps she'd built for catching the occasional rabbit or the invasive feral cats that sometimes ranged up from the valley. She reset what needed resetting, released what she didn't need. The meat she did take, she used completely. Nothing wasted. Her father had taught her that, back when he was still trying to make a hunter out of his daughter, instead of accepting what she was. Someone who loved the wild things more than she'd ever love the killing of them. By mid-morning, she'd be working with a small garden plot she'd carved from the rocky soil. It produced well enough in the short growing season: potatoes, carrots, turnips, kale that could handle the cold. She'd put in raised beds, filled them with composted soil she'd made herself over years. In late summer, she'd harvest and preserve, filling the loft with jars of vegetables that would see her through the winter. She'd learned to want for very little. Afternoons were for maintenance. There was always something. A section of roof that needed new shingles, a window pane to replace, firewood to split and stack. She kept herself busy because busy meant tired, and tired meant sleep came easier. The long summer evenings were harder, when the light lingered until 9 and there were too many hours to fill. That's when she'd find herself with the journal, the one she'd kept since the year Corey left. The leather journal was worn soft from handling, the pages filled with her small, careful handwriting. Letters to her son that she'd never sent. 30 years of apologies, explanations, questions about his life that would never be answered. Some years she wrote every week, other years only on his birthday, May 14th, and Christmas. She didn't know if he was alive or dead, married or alone, happy or haunted by the same ghosts that followed her through these mountains. She'd driven him away. That was the truth she carried. Vernon Kinsey was the postmaster in Cloudcroft, a position that apparently included being the informal courier for folks who lived too far out for regular mail delivery. Once a month, sometimes more often if the weather was good, he'd make the drive up the Forest Service road to Fern's cabin. He brought mail, though she rarely got any, and supplies she'd ordered. Flour, sugar, coffee, the things she couldn't grow or make herself. Vernon was 73 and had known Fern since before James died, before Corey left, before she became the woman everyone in town called the Hermit. He never asked questions she didn't want to answer. He'd arrive in his old pickup, honk twice, and wait for her to come out. They'd talk about the weather, about wildlife sightings, about nothing that mattered. Then he'd hand over whatever he'd brought, accept the cash she paid him, and drive away. Last month, he'd mentioned that Gretchen Rain had been asking about her. Gretchen was the wildlife officer for this section of the Lincoln National Forest, a woman in her 40s who'd grown up in Ruidoso and knew these mountains as well as anyone. She and Fern had crossed paths a few times over the years, always professionally. Fern reported poachers when she found evidence of them. Gretchen investigated, asked if Fern had seen anything else, and left her alone. She wanted to know if you were doing all right up here, Vernon had said, leaning against his truck. I told her you were tougher than jerky and twice as hard to chew. Fern had almost smiled at that. I'm fine. Tell her I'm fine. I did. She said to let her know if you ever need anything. It was kind of Gretchen, but Fern didn't need anything from anyone. She'd made her choices. She lived with them. The town of Cloudcroft sat at nearly 9,000 feet, a small community that swelled with tourists in summer and shrank to its core of a few hundred residents in winter. Fern had lived there with James and Corey for 10 years before James died. She'd worked at the library, a job she'd loved for its quiet and order. James had been a carpenter, good with his hands, patient with wood the way he was patient with people. They'd met in Alamogordo when she was 23 and he was 25. He'd been building cabinets for the school where she was teaching 3rd grade. She'd loved his steady calm, the way he listened more than he talked. They'd married within a year and moved up to Cloudcroft because James had gotten work there, and because Fern had always felt more herself in the mountains than in the desert basin below. Corey was born 2 years into their marriage, a May baby, arriving 3 weeks early during a late spring snowstorm. James had driven through whiteout conditions to get her to the hospital in Alamogordo, both of them terrified and elated. Corey came into the world squalling, red-faced and perfect. Fern had never known love like that before, the kind that felt like her heart was walking around outside her body. He'd been a gentle boy, curious and quiet like his father. He'd bring home injured things, a bird with a broken wing, a baby squirrel that had fallen from its nest, and nurse them with a tenderness that made Fern ache. By the time he was 12, half the town knew to bring wounded animals to the Maddra house. Corey would set up in the garage with boxes and heat lamps, research what the creature needed, coax it back to health if he could. When he was 14, he'd saved a red-tailed hawk that had been hit by a car. The hawk had a broken wing and a bad attitude. Corey had worked with it for 3 months, setting the wing, feeding it mice he'd caught in humane traps, talking to it in that soft voice he used with frightened things. When the hawk finally flew again, released from the ridge above their house, Corey had cried. Fern had stood beside him with her arm around his shoulders, so proud she could barely speak. That was the boy she'd lost. When Corey was 15, James started having chest pains. He ignored them for months, said it was heartburn, nothing to worry about. Fern had nagged him to see a doctor, but James was stubborn, didn't trust doctors, didn't like spending money they didn't have. By the time he finally went, his heart was already damaged. The doctor said he needed to take it easy, change his diet, reduce stress. James tried. He did. But carpentry was physical work, and they needed the income. Fern had gone back to teaching by then, but it wasn't enough. Medical bills piled up. James kept working, kept pushing himself because that's what he thought a man did for his family. The heart attack came on a Tuesday afternoon. Corey was 17, a senior in high school. Fern was at work. James had been alone in his workshop, building a bookshelf for the Methodist church. By the time Corey got home from school and found him, it had been too late for hours. Fern had blamed herself immediately. She should have made him stop working, should have insisted he see a specialist, should have noticed how tired he looked, how grey his face had become. The guilt was crushing, absolute. She couldn't breathe under the weight of it. Corey had blamed her, too. He didn't say it at first. They buried James on a cold February morning, with half the town present. People brought casseroles and condolences. Fern accepted both numbly. Corey stood beside her at the grave, silent and dry-eyed, and she'd worried that he wasn't processing it, that the grief would hit him later. It hit them both 2 months after the funeral. Fern had been sitting at the kitchen table, staring at medical bills they couldn't pay, when Corey came home from school. He'd been so quiet since James died, barely eating, barely speaking. She'd tried to reach him but didn't know how. Her own grief was too loud. "You killed him," Corey had said. Fern had looked up, certain she'd misheard. "You knew he was sick and you let him keep working. You killed him." The words had hit like a physical blow. Fern had tried to explain. The bills, the insurance, how James had refused to stop, but Corey hadn't wanted to hear it. He'd shouted things that 17-year-olds shout when the world stops making sense. He'd called her selfish, said she'd cared more about money than about Dad's life. And Fern, drowning in her own guilt, had shouted back. She'd said terrible things, things she'd spent 30 years wishing she could unsay. She'd told Corey he didn't understand anything about being an adult, about making impossible choices. She'd said he was acting like a child. She'd said if he was so smart, maybe he should figure out how to pay for his father's funeral. The look on Corey's face had sobered her instantly. She'd tried to take it back, tried to apologize, but the damage was done. Corey had gone to his room and closed the door. Fern had sat at the kitchen table and cried until she couldn't breathe. The next morning, Corey was gone. He'd left before dawn, taking his backpack, some clothes, and his father's truck. On his bed, he'd left the silver compass James had given him for his 16th birthday. Just the compass, no note. Fern had held it in her hands and known she'd lost them both. She'd called the police, but Corey was 17, nearly 18. They'd kept an eye out, but told her that kids run away sometimes, that he'd probably come back when he cooled down. She'd called everyone she could think of, his friends, their relatives, but no one had seen him. After 2 weeks, she'd hired a private investigator who'd found nothing. Corey had vanished as completely as if the earth had swallowed him. Fern had kept teaching for another year, but her heart wasn't in it. She'd walk through the grocery store and see mothers with their teenage sons and have to leave her cart and go sit in the car. She'd drive past the high school and remember Corey's graduation. That would never happen. Everything in Cloudcroft reminded her of what she'd lost. So she'd left, bought the land up in the high country with money from James's life insurance, built the cabin with her own hands because she deserved the hardship, deserved the isolation. She'd thought maybe if she made herself suffer enough, the guilt would ease. It never did. It just became part of the landscape, like the mountains themselves. Now, 30 years later, she was 62 years old and alone. Her hands were strong from work, but arthritic. Her hair had gone completely grey. She had a life that was simple and hard and probably deserved. She didn't expect forgiveness, didn't expect her son to come looking for her after all this time. She just existed, day after day, in the world she'd made for herself. The morning the wolf changed, everything started like any other. Fern woke before dawn, built the fire, made her coffee. The early November air was sharp, promising the winter that would arrive in earnest within weeks. She dressed in layers, thermal underwear, wool pants, flannel shirt, her heavy canvas jacket, pulled on thick socks and her hiking boots, the leather scarred and weathered. She checked her trap line, found nothing. Reset 2 traps that had been disturbed by raccoons. The forest was quiet in that particular way of late autumn, most of the birds already gone south, the bears thinking about their dens. Fern liked this time of year. The world felt hushed, waiting. She was 2 miles from the cabin, following a game trail she'd walked 1,000 times when she heard it, a sound that stopped her heart. It was a howl, but not like any she'd heard before. There was pain in it, raw and animal, and somehow human all at once. It rose and fell, echoing off the ridge faces, and the hair stood up on Fern's arms. She stood perfectly still, listening. The howl came again, weaker this time, coming from the north, maybe half a mile away, up where the trail wound through a rocky section before dropping into a meadow. Every instinct told her to go back to the cabin. Whatever was making that sound was hurt and frightened, which made it dangerous. But her feet were already moving, following the sound, because 30 years ago her son had taught her that you didn't walk away from something in pain. The trail climbed steeply through the rocks. Fern's breath came hard in the thin air. She was fit for 62, but she felt every yaw in the burning of her lungs. The howling had stopped. In the silence, she could hear her own heartbeat. Then she saw it. The wolf lay in a small clearing just off the trail, its massive body twisted at an unnatural angle. One of its rear legs was caught in a steel leg-hold trap, the kind that had been illegal in New Mexico for over a decade. The wolf's black fur was matted with blood. Its yellow eyes tracked Fern's approach with an intensity that made her freeze. It was the biggest wolf she'd ever seen, easily 120 pounds, maybe more. Pure black, except for a small patch of white on its chest. The trap's jaws had bitten deep into the leg above the ankle joint. The wolf had clearly tried to chew itself free. Its muzzle was bloody, and the ground around the trap was torn up where it had struggled. The wolf's lips pulled back, showing teeth. A low growl rumbled from its chest. Fern held very still. Her mind was racing through options, all of them bad. The wolf was trapped and in agony. It would die here if she didn't help, but getting close enough to release the trap meant getting close enough to those teeth, and a wolf this size could kill her without much effort. The wolf's eyes met hers. In that moment, Fern saw something that shouldn't have been possible. Recognition. Not of her specifically, but of what she was. Not a threat. Not prey. Just another living thing standing at the edge of its pain. She made her decision. Fern backed away slowly, never breaking eye contact with the wolf. She spoke in a low, steady voice, the same one she'd used with Corey when he was small and frightened of thunderstorms. "I know you're scared. I know it hurts. I'm going to help you, but you need to let me." The wolf watched her, its growl subsiding to a low whine. Fern moved carefully, no sudden gestures. She shrugged off her pack and set it on the ground. Inside, she kept a small emergency kit, basic first aid supplies, water, rope, a knife. She'd need all of it. First, she needed to calm the animal. She pulled out her water bottle and a tin cup, poured water into the cup, and set it within the wolf's reach. The wolf's nose twitched. It was likely dehydrated, after however long it had been trapped here. Based on the torn-up ground, Fern guessed at least a day. Maybe 2. The wolf stretched its neck and lapped at the water desperately. While it drank, Fern studied the trap. It was old, crusted with rust, but still brutally effective. The springs were powerful. She'd need something to lever them open. She looked around and found a sturdy branch, about 3 feet long and thick as her wrist. It would have to do. "I'm going to get closer now," she said, still in that calm voice. "Don't bite me. Please don't bite me." The wolf had finished the water. It was watching her again, panting, its tongue lolling. Up close, Fern could see it was a female, could see the exhaustion in every line of its body. The leg caught in the trap was mangled, bleeding sluggishly. The wolf had worn itself out trying to escape. Fern knelt about 4 feet away, still outside the range of those jaws. She showed the wolf the branch, moving slowly so it could see she wasn't attacking. Then she positioned the branch against one of the trap's springs. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I'm sorry." She put her weight on the branch. The spring compressed a fraction of an inch. The trap was powerful, designed to hold animals much stronger than her. Fern adjusted her angle and tried again, using her legs to push. The spring gave a little more. The wolf yelped as the jaws shifted on its leg. I know, I'm sorry." Sweat ran down Fern's back despite the cold air. Her muscles trembled with the effort. She pushed harder, and suddenly the spring gave way with a metallic clunk. One side of the trap jaw opened. The wolf's leg was still caught in the other jaw, but there was space now. Fern moved to the second spring, repositioning the branch. This one was stiffer, or maybe she was just getting tired. She pushed until spots danced in her vision, until her shoulders screamed. The spring compressed. The jaw opened. The wolf yanked its leg free immediately, scrambling backward with a yelp of pain. The trap snapped shut with a vicious clang, right where Fern's hands had been a second before. For a moment, Fern just knelt there, shaking. That had been close. Too close. She looked up to find the wolf 10 feet away, crouched low, watching her. The injured leg was held off the ground, but the wolf was free. "You're welcome," Fern said. The wolf made a sound somewhere between a whine and a growl. Its leg was a mess. Deep lacerations, possible tendon damage, definitely swollen. If infection set in, the wolf would die anyway, just slower. Fern couldn't let that happen, not after coming this far. She opened her first aid kit and pulled out the antiseptic wash, gauze, and the elastic bandage she kept for sprains. The wolf watched every movement. "I need to clean that," Fern said, holding up the bottle of antiseptic. "It's going to sting, but it'll keep the infection out. Will you let me?" The wolf's ears flicked. It took a tentative step forward, then stopped. Fern stayed very still. The wolf took another step, limping badly. Then another. It stopped just out of reach, its whole body tense, ready to bolt. Fern poured antiseptic onto a clean cloth. "Last chance to run," she said, softly. The wolf didn't run. It watched with those yellow eyes as Fern reached out slowly, so slowly, and touched the cloth to the damaged leg. The wolf flinched but held still. Fern worked quickly, cleaning the worst of the blood and dirt. The wounds were deep but clean, no bone showing, no arterial bleeding. With care and rest it might heal. Fern wrapped the leg in gauze, then secured it with the elastic bandage. Not perfect, but better than nothing. "There," she said, sitting back. "That's the best I can do." The wolf looked at its bandaged leg, then back at Fern. For just a second, something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or just exhaustion and relief. Then the wolf turned and limped into the trees, favoring the injured leg but moving steadily. Fern watched until it disappeared into the shadows. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was hammering. She'd just freed and treated a wild wolf with her bare hands, and somehow survived the experience. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving her weak and dizzy. She looked at the trap lying on the ground, its jaws now harmless. Rage flared through her. This trap was illegal. Someone had set it deliberately, probably for wolves, maybe for other predators they could sell. The practice was cruel and endangered not just the target animals, but hikers and dogs and anything else that might wander through. Fern picked up the trap. It was heavy, cast iron and steel. She carried it to a boulder and smashed it against the rock over and over until the springs broke and the jaws bent. Then she threw the pieces as far into the forest as she could manage. The sun was higher now. Fern realized she'd been here for over an hour. She repacked her kit, shouldered her pack, and started back toward the cabin. Her legs felt like water. Every few steps she looked back over her shoulder, half expecting to see the wolf following. But there was nothing except trees and shadows. Back at the cabin, Fern made herself lunch, bread and cheese and the last of the venison from a deer Vernon had brought her in October. But she couldn't eat. She kept thinking about the wolf's eyes, about the trust it had shown by staying still while she bandaged its leg, about how close she'd come to losing her hands to that trap. She thought about Corey, too, about the hawk with the broken wing, about all the injured creatures he'd brought home. He would have done the same thing she'd just done. He'd been brave that way, willing to risk himself to help something helpless. She wondered where he was, if he was still that kind of person, if he ever thought about her. That night, lying in her narrow bed with the fire burning low, Fern heard it, a howl, distant but clear, coming from somewhere up on the ridge. It wasn't a howl of pain this time. It was different, deeper. It sent shivers down her spine in a way that wasn't entirely from fear. She got up and went to the window. The moon was nearly full, bright enough to cast shadows. She scanned the tree line but saw nothing. The howl came again, and this time she heard others join in. A pack, calling to each other across the darkness. Was one of them the black wolf? Was it with its family, showing them it had survived? Fern pressed her forehead against the cold glass. For the first time in 30 years, she felt something other than guilt and loneliness. She felt connected to something wild and alive and struggling to survive, just like her. She didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, She saw the wolf's yellow gaze. Every time she drifted off, she dreamed of Corey at 12 years old, gentle hands coaxing a terrified hawk to trust him. When dawn came, pale and cold, Fern made her coffee and stood at the window. She told herself she wouldn't go looking for the wolf. It was wild. It needed to stay that way. She'd done what she could. But even as she thought it, she knew it was a lie. Something had shifted in her when she'd knelt beside that trap. Some long frozen part of her heart had cracked open. She'd felt needed, useful, necessary. She'd felt the way she used to feel when Corey would bring home some broken thing and look at her with absolute faith that together they could fix it. She finished her coffee and made a decision. She'd go back to the trap site. She'd check for more traps, destroy any she found. And if she happened to see the wolf while she was out there, she'd make sure it was healing properly. It was only practical, only sensible. The lie was easier to believe in daylight. Fern dressed warmly, packed extra supplies, more antiseptic, more bandages, a thermos of water. She filled her pockets with strips of dried venison from her stores, just in case. The walk to the trap site took 40 minutes. The clearing was empty, but Fern could see fresh tracks in the frost. Wolf tracks, large ones, moving north toward the rockier terrain. She followed them. The tracks led her up into an area she didn't usually travel, where the forest gave way to scattered boulders and scrub. She was about to turn back when she saw it, a dark shape moving between the rocks, the black wolf. It was digging at something. As Fern got closer, moving carefully to stay downwind, she realized what it was. A den. The wolf was clearing the entrance to a den. Fern's breath caught. The wolf wasn't alone. There were pups. She backed away slowly, her mind reeling. A mother wolf. That explained the size, the desperation to escape the trap. She'd been trying to get back to her young, and Fern had freed her, had given her a chance to survive, to feed her babies, to raise them. Tears stung Fern's eyes. She blinked them away, angry at herself. It was just an animal, just nature doing what nature does. But it didn't feel like just anything. It felt important in a way she couldn't quite name. The mother wolf looked up suddenly, directly at Fern. Their eyes met across 50 yards of broken ground. The wolf's ears came forward. It didn't growl, didn't show teeth, it just watched. Fern pulled the dried venison from her pocket and set it on a flat rock, then backed away. The wolf waited until Fern was a good distance off before limping over to investigate. It sniffed the meat, then picked it up gently in its jaws and carried it back toward the den. Fern stood there for a long time, watching the place where the wolf had disappeared. The sun was warm on her face. A raven called from somewhere overhead. The world felt bigger somehow, fuller of possibility than it had in years. She walked home with something unfamiliar settling in her chest. It took her a while to recognize it. Hope. The next morning, Fern told herself she was just checking her regular trap line, that her route didn't need to swing past the rocky area where she'd seen the den, that she absolutely wasn't bringing extra food in her pack, specifically for a wild wolf. She told herself a lot of things that weren't quite true anymore. The mother wolf was at the den entrance when Fern arrived. She was lying in a patch of sun, the bandaged leg stretched out in front of her. When she saw Fern approaching, she stood, but she didn't retreat. She just waited, ears forward, alert but not afraid. Fern stopped at the same rock where she'd left food yesterday. She set down fresh water in a collapsible bowl and a handful of dried meat. Then she sat on a fallen log about 20 feet away and pretended to be interested in the view. The wolf watched her for a long moment. Then, with a dignity that seemed almost human, she limped over to the offerings. She drank deeply from the bowl first, then ate the meat in quick, efficient bites. When she was finished, she looked at Fern again. "You're welcome," Fern said quietly. The wolf's tail moved, not quite a wag, but not hostile either. Then she turned and went back to the den. A moment later, Fern heard small yips and squeaks from inside the rocks, the pups calling for their mother. Fern felt her heart contract. She knew she should leave, should let nature take its course, but she found herself returning the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the first week, the wolf had begun to anticipate her arrival. She'd be waiting near the rock, her yellow eyes tracking Fern's approach. The bandage had fallen off after a few days, but the leg was healing cleanly. The wolf still limped, but less severely. She could put weight on it now. Fern started bringing better food, fresh rabbit when she caught one, the good cuts of venison she'd been saving. She told herself it was practical. A nursing mother needed protein. But really, she just wanted to help, wanted to feel useful, wanted to matter to something living. On the 8th day, the wolf came closer. Not all the way to Fern, but close enough that Fern could see the scars on her muzzle, the way her ears had been torn at some point in her life. This was an animal that had survived hard things, just like Fern. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Fern said softly. The wolf cocked her head, listening. Then she did something extraordinary. She sat down, still 10 feet away, and simply looked at Fern. Not with wariness or calculation, but with something that felt almost like companionship. They stayed like that for nearly an hour, woman and wolf, sharing the autumn sunshine. Fern talked in a low voice, the way she used to talk to Corey when he was small and couldn't sleep. She talked about the weather, about the ravens that nested in the big ponderosa near her cabin, about nothing and everything. The wolf listened with an intensity that made Fern wonder what she heard in the tone of voice, if not the words. That night, back at her cabin, Fern opened her leather journal for the first time in months. She usually only wrote to Corey on his birthday or Christmas, but tonight felt different. Tonight she needed to tell him something, even if he'd never read it. "Dear Corey," she wrote, "I saved a wolf today. Well, 2 weeks ago, actually, but I've been visiting her every day since. She has pups. She was caught in a trap, and I freed her. And now we have this strange understanding. You would love her. You always had a way with wild things." She paused, pen hovering over the paper. The next words felt too big, too honest. "I think I'm starting to remember what it feels like to care about something again. I'd forgotten. For so long, I've just been existing, going through motions. But this wolf, she needs me. Just a little, just enough. And I need to be needed, I think. I need to matter. I'm sorry, Corey. I'm sorry for all of it. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to hold us together after your father died. I'm sorry I said those terrible things. I'm sorry I let you go. If you're out there somewhere, if you ever think about home, I want you to know I'm still here. I've always been here. Waiting." She closed the journal before she could cross out the words, before she could tell herself it was foolish to write letters to a son who probably hated her, who'd probably built a life that had no room for a mother who'd failed him. Sleep came hard that night. She kept thinking about Corey at 12, the way his whole face would light up when an injured animal took food from his hand, the way he'd spend hours talking to scared creatures, his patience infinite, his kindness absolute. She'd had that patience once, with him. She'd been a good mother when he was young. Somewhere between childhood and 17, she'd lost the thread of how to reach him. and when James died, the distance between them had become a chasm she hadn't known how to cross. The photograph was in her dresser, tucked beneath her winter sweaters. She rarely looked at it anymore. It hurt too much. But tonight she pulled it out and studied it by lamplight. Corey at 11, holding a baby fox he'd found abandoned by the road. The fox was tiny, barely the size of his palm, and he was looking down at it with such fierce protectiveness that Fern's throat closed up just seeing it. That boy had grown into a young man who'd lost his father and blamed his mother. That young man had driven away in the middle of the night and never looked back. Was he still alive? Still kind? Had the world hardened him, or had he managed to keep that soft heart intact? Fern didn't know. Couldn't know. The not knowing was its own kind of trap, one she couldn't chew her way out of. She put the photograph back under the sweaters and went to bed. But before she blew out the lamp, she made a decision. Tomorrow, when she visited the wolf, she'd bring her camera. The old Polaroid she'd had since the 80s, the one she'd used to document Corey's childhood. She'd take a picture of the wolf, proof that this was real, that this strange grace had entered her life. Maybe someday she'd show it to Corey. Maybe someday she'd have the chance to tell him about the mother wolf who'd trusted her, who'd let her help. Maybe he'd understand what she was trying to say, that she was learning, finally, how to do better, how to be the kind of person who helped instead of hurt. Maybe. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sky that particular shade of blue that only happened in high desert country. Fern packed her supplies, tucked the Polaroid into her jacket pocket, and set out for the den. The mother wolf was waiting, as she always was now. But today something was different. Today, 3 small shapes were tumbling around her feet. The pups had emerged from the den. Fern froze, afraid to move and startle them. The pups were maybe 8 weeks old, all legs and oversized ears, their fur still fuzzy with puppy down. 2 were dark grey. 1 was black like its mother, with the same white patch on its chest. The mother wolf looked at Fern, then deliberately lay down. The pups climbed over her, play-fighting and yipping. It was an invitation, a show of trust. Slowly, carefully, Fern pulled out the camera. She took 1 shot, then another. The whir and click of the Polaroid made the mother wolf's ears twitch, but she didn't get up. She stayed relaxed, watching Fern with calm eyes. The smallest pup, the black one, suddenly noticed Fern. It stopped wrestling with its siblings and stared, its head tilted. Then, with the fearlessness of the very young, it started toddling toward her. The mother wolf made a soft, chuffing sound. The pup stopped, looked back at its mother, then continued forward. Clearly the mother had decided Fern wasn't a threat. The pup made it to within 5 feet before its courage failed. It sat down hard and stared at Fern with enormous amber eyes. Fern held very still. The pup inched forward. Then, quick as lightning, it darted in and licked Fern's boot before racing back to its mother. The other pups joined the game. Soon all 3 were making brief, brave runs at Fern, touching her boots or her pack before scrambling away. The mother wolf watched, patient and unworried. Fern felt tears on her face and didn't bother wiping them away. This moment, sitting in the cold sunshine while wolf pups played around her feet, felt like absolution. Like the mountains were telling her she wasn't beyond redemption. That kindness still mattered. That care could still make a difference. When she finally stood to leave, the smallest pup followed her a few steps before its mother called it back. Fern looked at the wolf 1 more time. "Thank you," she whispered. The wolf's tail thumped once against the ground, If Fern didn't know better, she'd have sworn the wolf understood. 2 weeks after the pups emerged, Vernon Kinsey made his monthly supply run. Fern heard his truck struggling up the Forest Service road long before she saw it. The engine labored in the thin air, the tires crunching over the half-frozen dirt. She met him outside, as always. Vernon climbed down from the cab slowly, favoring his left knee. He'd had replacement surgery last year, but it still gave him trouble in the cold. "Got your flour and coffee," he said, moving to the truck bed. "And some news if you want it." Fern helped him carry the supplies to the porch. "What kind of news?" "The wildlife officer was asking about you again. Gretchen Rain. Said there have been reports of a big wolf up in this area. Asked if I'd seen signs of it on my drives up here." Fern kept her face neutral. "What did you tell her?" "Told her the truth, that I haven't seen any wolf, which I haven't." Vernon gave her a long look. "But if I had, I'd probably mention that there's been talk down in Cloudcroft. Some hunters are getting interested. Figure a wolf that big would make a nice trophy." Fern's stomach clenched. It's illegal to hunt wolves in New Mexico. Hasn't stopped folks before. And if they claim it was threatening livestock or attacking pets, they can get away with it. You know how it works. She did know. She'd seen it happen with coyotes and mountain lions, animals shot and justified after the fact. A wolf would be even more vulnerable. There were so few of them left in New Mexico. Ranchers and hunters looked for any excuse. After Vernon left, Fern sat on her porch and thought. The mother wolf had come to trust her. The pups played freely in her presence now. They'd created something fragile and rare. This understanding between woman and wild animal. The thought of someone shooting the mother, leaving the pups to starve, made Fern physically sick. She needed to be more careful. Needed to make sure she wasn't being followed on her daily hikes. Needed to protect what she'd found. The silver compass was in the drawer beside her bed, where it had been for 30 years. That night, Fern pulled it out and held it in her palm. The metal was cold, the glass face slightly fogged with age. James had bought it at an antique store in Ruidoso, had it engraved with Corey's initials, CJM, Corey James Maddra. "So you can always find your way home," James had said, presenting it to Corey on his 16th birthday. But Corey had left it behind, left it on his bed, like a rejection of everything it represented. Fern had picked it up that terrible morning and felt like she was holding her son's heart, abandoned and broken. Now she turned it over in her hands, remembering. Corey had loved that compass. For months after James gave it to him, he'd carried it everywhere, checking their direction on hikes, using it to navigate to fishing spots. It had meant something to him, which made leaving it behind even more devastating. Fern opened her journal and turned to one of the earliest letters, written just days after Corey left. "Dear Corey, I found your compass. I'm keeping it safe for you. When you come home, I'll give it back. I know you will come home. You have to come home. I can't lose both of you. Please, Corey, please forgive me." The handwriting was shaky, desperate. Fern barely recognized herself in those words. She'd been so sure, in those early days, that Corey would return. That whatever anger had driven him away would burn itself out. And he'd come back, sullen maybe, but home. She'd been wrong. Days had turned to weeks, weeks to months. The private investigator she'd hired had found nothing. Corey had been smart about it. He'd sold his father's truck in Texas for cash, left no paper trail. After 3 months, even the investigator had suggested she stop paying him. The boy didn't want to be found. Fern had kept teaching that first year, moving through her days like a ghost. She'd wake up and forget, just for a second, that both James and Corey were gone. Then reality would crash back, and she'd have to learn it all over again. The double grief, the guilt, the emptiness. By the second year, she couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't stand in front of children and pretend to care about multiplication tables when her own child was missing. Couldn't smile at parent-teacher conferences when she'd failed so completely as a parent herself. So she'd left, built the cabin, disappeared into the mountains like Corey had disappeared into the world. The mother wolf had done what Fern had failed to do. She'd fought through pain to protect her children. She'd dragged herself through agony to get back to her pups. She'd survived because they needed her to survive. Fern had just given up. The realization hit hard, sitting there in the lamplight with the compass in one hand and her journal in the other. She'd told herself for 30 years that she was punishing herself, that the isolation was penance. But really, she'd just been hiding. Too scared to face the world that had taken her family. Too guilty to try to make things right. She set down the journal and stood up, made herself tea even though her hands were shaking, drank it standing at the window, looking out at the darkness. The mother wolf hadn't had the luxury of giving up. She'd had 3 lives depending on her. So she'd survived the trap, survived the injury, survived each day until she was strong enough to hunt again. What did Fern have to survive for? The question hung in the cold air. For 30 years, the answer had been nothing. Just habit. Just the passage of time. But now there was the wolf. Not a reason to survive exactly, but a reason to get up each morning. A reason to pack supplies and hike through the cold. A reason to care whether the sun came up tomorrow. It wasn't enough. Not really. But it was more than she'd had in a long time. The next morning, Fern took the compass with her when she hiked to the den. She didn't know why, exactly. Just felt like it should be there, witnessing what she was learning. The mother wolf greeted her with a low, friendly chuff. The pups came bounding over immediately, all 3 of them braver now. They investigated Fern's boots, her pack, her coat pockets. The black pup, the smallest, was the boldest. It climbed right into Fern's lap when she sat down. Fern froze, afraid to move and startle it. The pup curled up against her leg, warm and trusting, and closed its eyes. Within seconds, it was asleep. The mother wolf watched this from a few feet away. She didn't seem concerned. After a moment, she lay down too, her injured leg stretched out, and rested her head on her paws. They stayed like that for over an hour. Woman, wolf, and pups, sharing the pale November sunshine. Fern stroked the sleeping pup's fur with one finger, careful not to wake it. Its fur was incredibly soft, still carrying that puppy fluff. Its paws were huge compared to its body, promise of the size it would eventually reach. When the pup finally woke and scrambled off to play with its siblings, Fern pulled out the compass. She held it up, letting the sunlight catch the glass. The needle spun, then settled, pointing north toward the distant peaks. The mother wolf lifted her head, watching. Fern had the strange thought that the wolf understood what the compass was, not literally, but in some deeper way. A tool for finding direction, for not getting lost. "I don't know if I can find my way back," Fern said quietly. "I've been lost a long time." The wolf's ears came forward. She stood up, limped over to Fern, and did something she'd never done before. She pressed her nose briefly against Fern's hand. Just once. Then she stepped back and returned to watching her pups. Fern's breath caught. It was such a small gesture, but it felt enormous. Acceptance, trust, connection. She tucked the compass back into her pocket. Maybe she couldn't find her way back to who she'd been before. Maybe that person was gone, lost the same night Corey drove away. But maybe she could find her way to something new, someone who deserved the trust this wild creature was offering. When she stood to leave, the black pup followed her to the edge of the clearing, just like it always did. It sat down and watched her go, its head tilted in question. "I'll be back tomorrow," Fern promised. The pup's tail wagged. Fern smiled all the way home. The compass was a small weight in her pocket, but it felt right there. Like maybe, after all these years, she was finally ready to let it guide her somewhere new. That night, she wrote in her journal again. "Dear Corey, I think I understand now what you tried to teach me. All those times you brought home broken things. It wasn't about fixing them. It was about being willing to try. About showing up every day and offering what you had, even if it wasn't much. Even if you didn't know if it would work. I'm trying now. I know it's 30 years too late. But I'm trying." She closed the journal and blew out the lamp. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled. Fern listened until the sound faded into the night, then closed her eyes and slept better than she had in months. 3 days later, Gretchen Rain came to the cabin. Fern saw the Forest Service truck coming up the road and felt her stomach drop. She'd been expecting this, but that didn't make it easier. She wiped her hands on her jeans and waited on the porch. Gretchen stepped out of the truck, adjusting her ranger hat. She was a solid woman in her mid-40s, with sun-weathered skin and grey threading through her dark hair. She'd been doing this work for 20 years and had the kind of competence that came from experience. "Fern," she said, nodding. "Got a minute?" "Sure." Fern stayed on the porch, not inviting her in. "What brings you up here?" "I'm investigating reports of a large wolf in this area. Black wolf, bigger than usual. Several hunters have mentioned it. I'm trying to determine if it's actually here or if folks are seeing things that aren't there." Gretchen's eyes were sharp, missing nothing. "You spend more time in these mountains than anyone. Have you seen it?" Fern had prepared for this question. She'd thought through the lie carefully, weighed it against her conscience. But seeing Gretchen standing there, honest and direct, made it harder than she'd expected. "I've seen wolf tracks," Fern said slowly. "Nothing unusual about the size. Could just be a healthy male passing through." It wasn't exactly a lie. She had seen tracks. They just happened to belong to a female wolf she visited every day. Gretchen nodded. "The thing is, I've got hunters pushing for a permit. They're claiming this wolf has been stalking their camps, acting aggressive. I don't believe them. Sounds like typical exaggeration to justify a hunt. But if enough people make noise, my supervisor might approve it." "Wolves are protected," Fern said. "They are. But the law has exceptions. Wolves deemed a threat to humans or livestock can be removed. All it takes is the right documentation, true or not." Gretchen paused. "I don't want to see a wolf shot because some trophy hunter made up stories. So I'm asking everyone in the area to keep an eye out. If this wolf exists and if it's behaving normally, I need evidence of that to counter the hunter claims." Fern felt trapped. Gretchen was offering help, offering to protect the wolf, but accepting that help meant revealing its location, trusting that the protection wouldn't somehow lead to the wolf's death anyway. "I'll keep my eyes open," Fern said finally. Gretchen studied her for a long moment. "You know, Fern, I've always respected how you live up here, how you handle yourself in the wilderness. You know these mountains better than anyone. If there's a wolf up here, and if it needs protecting, I figure you'd be the one to know." It was as close to calling Fern's bluff as Gretchen could get without directly accusing her of lying. Fern met her eyes and said nothing. "Well," Gretchen said after a pause, "if you see anything, you let me know. And be careful. If hunters come up here looking for this wolf, they might not be too careful about where they're shooting." After Gretchen left, Fern sat on the porch for a long time thinking. The threat was real now, not hypothetical. Hunters were actively looking for the mother wolf, and they had money and determination on their side. She needed to be smarter, needed to cover her tracks better, vary her route to the den, make sure nobody could follow her. She also needed to think about what came next. The pups were growing fast. Soon they'd be ranging farther from the den, exploring. More visible, more vulnerable. The weather-beaten, no trespassing sign at the edge of her property had fallen over sometime last winter. Fern had never bothered to fix it. She didn't get visitors anyway. But now she wondered if she should put it back up, make it clearer that this land was private. Not that it would stop determined hunters, but it might make them think twice. That afternoon, she hiked to the den by a different route, one that took her through thick forest where her tracks would be hidden by pine needles. When she arrived, the mother wolf was already alert, her ears swiveling toward sounds Fern couldn't hear. "I know," Fern said quietly. "I smell it too. Danger." The mother wolf came closer than usual, almost within touching distance. The pups were nowhere in sight, hidden in the den, probably. The wolf's whole body was tense, ready to fight or flee. Fern set down food and water, but the wolf didn't approach it. She just stood there, staring at Fern with those yellow eyes, and Fern had the uncanny feeling that the wolf was trying to tell her something. "I don't know how to keep you safe," Fern admitted. "I don't know if I can." The wolf whined, a sound Fern had never heard from her before. It was almost plaintive, almost human in its need. Then Fern heard it, the distant sound of engines, ATVs maybe, or trucks on the old logging roads. They were far away, but sound carried strangely in these mountains. What seemed distant could be closer than you thought. The mother wolf heard it too. Her lips pulled back in a silent snarl. Then she turned and disappeared into the den. Within seconds, she emerged with a pup in her mouth, the black one, the smallest. She carried it past Fern into deeper rocks, made 2 more trips for the other pups. Fern understood. The wolf was moving her den, moving her family away from the threat she sensed coming. "Go," Fern whispered. "Go far. Stay hidden." The mother wolf looked back one last time. Then she was gone, vanishing into the forest with her pups like smoke in wind. Fern stood there alone, feeling the loss like a physical ache. She'd known this would happen eventually. The wolf was wild, and wild things didn't stay. But she'd thought she'd have more time, thought she'd have a chance to prepare for the emptiness. She hiked home slowly, listening for engines but hearing nothing now except the wind in the pines. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe the wolf had been reacting to something else entirely. But when she got close to her cabin, she saw it. A truck parked on the side of the Forest Service road, about half a mile from her turnoff. New truck, expensive. Not a Forest Service vehicle, not Vernon's old beater. Fern approached carefully. The truck was empty, but there were boot prints leading into the trees. Fresh prints. Someone was out there, in her forest, probably carrying a rifle. She went to the cabin and got her own rifle from above the door, checked that it was loaded. Then she followed the boot prints. They led toward the area where the old den had been. Fern's heart hammered. She moved quietly, using every skill her father had taught her about tracking and moving unseen. The forest was her home. She knew every rock and tree. She found him about a quarter-mile in, a man in expensive hunting gear, carrying a rifle that probably cost more than Fern's entire cabin. He was examining the ground near the den site, clearly following tracks. Fern stepped out from behind a ponderosa. "This is private property. You need to leave." The man spun around, startled. He was maybe 40, well-fed, with the kind of tan that came from country clubs rather than actual outdoor work. His rifle swung toward her before he caught himself. "Easy," he said, lowering the barrel. "I'm just tracking a wolf. You seen it?" "No." Fern kept her own rifle pointed at the ground, but her finger was near the trigger. "And like I said, this is private property. You're trespassing. I've got permission to hunt on federal land. This is federal land." He gestured around them. "This is the boundary of federal land. You're on my property now, and I'm asking you to leave." The man's jaw tightened. "You know there's a reward for information on that black wolf. $5,000. If you've seen it, you'd be smart to tell me." "I haven't seen any wolf." Fern's voice was flat, final. "Now get off my land before I call the Forest Service and report you for trespassing." They stared at each other for a long moment. Fern saw him weighing his options. She was an old woman alone in the Sessa woods, and he probably thought he could intimidate her. But she'd also just demonstrated she knew how to handle a rifle and wasn't afraid of confrontation. "This isn't over," he said finally. "That wolf is around here somewhere. I'm going to find it." "Maybe, but you're not going to find it on my property." Fern gestured with her rifle toward the road. "Move." He went, muttering under his breath. Fern followed at a distance until she saw him get in his truck and drive away. Only then did she lower her rifle and let out the breath she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from anger. The arrogance of the man, coming onto her land, threatening her wolves, offering money like everyone had a price. She went to the old den site and examined it carefully. The wolf had been smart. She'd covered her tracks when she left, scattered debris to hide the pup's prints. But a determined hunter could still find them, could still track them to their new location. Fern spent the rest of the afternoon obliterating the tracks she could find. She scattered pine needles, dragged branches across disturbed soil, even poured water from the creek to wash away scent. It probably wouldn't fool a bloodhound, but it might confuse a man with a rifle and too much money. When she finally made it back to the cabin, the sun was setting. The temperature was dropping fast. They were due for frost tonight. Fern built up the fire and made herself dinner, but she couldn't eat. She kept thinking about the mother wolf, about where she might have taken the pups. There were deeper caves in the high country, places humans rarely went. Maybe she'd gone there. Maybe she was safe. Or maybe she was struggling with a still healing leg, trying to hunt for 3 growing pups, vulnerable and afraid. Fern opened her journal, but she couldn't write. The words wouldn't come. Instead, she just sat by the fire and watched the flames, feeling more alone than she had in years. The wolf had been her connection to something larger than herself, her reason to wake up, to keep going. And now that connection was severed, cut by the threat of men with guns and money. Outside, the temperature dropped below freezing. Frost formed on the windows. Fern wrapped herself in a quilt, the one she'd made during her first winter here, each square representing a memory she couldn't bear to let go. James's favorite flannel shirt, Corey's baby blanket, a piece of her own wedding dress. She pulled the quilt tight around her shoulders and tried not to think about a mother wolf and 3 small pups, somewhere out there in the freezing darkness, running from danger they didn't fully understand. tried not to think about how powerless she was to protect them. Tried not to think about how familiar that helplessness felt. The storm hit 3 days later, roaring down from the north with a fury that caught even Fern off guard. She'd been expecting snow. It was mid-November after all, but this was different. This was a blizzard, the kind that shut down the mountains for days. It started before dawn, snow coming down so thick she couldn't see the trees 50 feet from her cabin. The wind screamed through the eaves, rattling the shutters. By noon there were already 8 inches on the ground, and no sign of it stopping. Fern stood at the window with her coffee, watching the world disappear into white. And all she could think about was the mother wolf. Where had she gone? Was her new den high enough that it wouldn't flood if the snow melted too fast? Were the pups warm enough? She tried to push the thoughts away. The wolf was wild. She'd survived worse than this. She didn't need Fern's help. But by afternoon, Fern couldn't stand it anymore. She dressed in her warmest clothes, thermal layers, heavy wool pants, her waterproof jacket, insulated gloves. She filled her pack with food, extra blankets, a thermos of hot water. Told herself she was just going to check, just going to make sure. The wind nearly knocked her over when she stepped outside. The snow was coming down sideways, stinging her face like needles. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. This was dangerous, possibly deadly. She should go back inside. But she thought about those pups, small and vulnerable, and she kept walking. She knew these mountains by heart, but in a whiteout, everything looked different. She had to navigate by feel, by memory, following the ridgeline she knew was there, even though she couldn't see it. Her compass helped. She checked it every few minutes, making sure she was still heading northwest toward the high country, where she thought the wolf might have gone. It took her 2 hours to cover what should have been a 40-minute hike. She was exhausted, half frozen, starting to wonder if this was the stupidest thing she'd ever done. Then she heard it, a sound that cut through the wind. A wolf's howl, but weaker than usual, distressed. Fern pushed forward, following the sound. She found herself in an area of tumbled boulders, natural formations that created shelters and caves. And there, in the mouth of a half-collapsed den, was the mother wolf. The entrance had caved in, probably from the weight of snow. The wolf was digging frantically, her injured leg clearly paining her, trying to clear the debris. Fern could hear the pups inside, yipping, frightened, maybe running out of air. The mother wolf saw Fern and, instead of backing away, she looked directly at her. It was a look of pure desperation. "Help! Please, help!" Fern dropped her pack and moved to the den entrance. The collapse wasn't complete. There was still an opening, but it was partially blocked by a large rock and packed snow. Together, they could move it. Apart, it was impossible. "Okay," Fern said, breathing hard. "Okay, I'm here. We'll get them out." She positioned herself on one side of the boulder, while the wolf dug at the snow around it. They worked in tandem, Fern using a branch to lever the rock while the wolf scraped away the packed snow underneath. Fern's muscles screamed. Her hands were so cold she could barely feel them. The wind kept filling in the hole they were making almost as fast as they could dig it out. But slowly, impossibly, the rock began to move. With a final heave from Fern and a desperate scramble from the wolf, the boulder shifted. Snow cascaded down, but the opening was clear now. The mother wolf immediately squeezed through, disappearing into the den. Fern waited, her heart pounding. Seconds later, the wolf emerged with a pup in her mouth. She set it down carefully, went back for the second, then the third. All 3 pups were shivering but alive. The black one, Fern's favorite, though she tried not to have favorites, looked up at her with huge eyes, and stumbled over on unsteady legs. It pressed against her boot, seeking warmth. The mother wolf watched this. Then she did something extraordinary. She picked up the black pup, carried it over to Fern, and set it down directly at her feet. Went back and got the second pup, the third. She was entrusting her pups to Fern, asking for help in the only way she knew how. Fern's throat closed up. She knelt down in the snow, opened her jacket, and tucked the 3 shivering pups against her body. They burrowed into her warmth immediately, their small bodies trembling. The mother wolf pressed close, sharing her body heat, and together they huddled in the shelter of the boulders while the storm raged around them. Fern lost track of time. Could have been an hour, could have been 3. She talked to the wolf in a low voice, telling her stories about Corey, about the animals he'd saved. The wolf listened, her ears flicking toward Fern's voice, even as she kept watch on the storm. When the worst of the wind finally died down, Fern helped the wolf find a better den, one deeper in the rocks, with a stable ceiling and good drainage. She used the blankets from her pack to line it, making a warm nest. The wolf carried the pups in one by one, settling them in their new home. Before Fern left, the mother wolf came to her. She pressed her forehead against Fern's hand, holding it there for a long moment. It was gratitude, trust, and something deeper. Partnership, recognition of what they'd accomplished together. Fern buried her other hand in the wolf's thick fur, feeling the solid warmth of her. "You're a good mother," she whispered. "You never gave up on them. You never stopped trying." The wolf's tail wagged once. Then she turned and went into the den with her pups. Fern's journey home took even longer than the trip out. The storm had eased, but snow was still falling steadily. She was so exhausted she could barely think, operating on pure muscle memory and stubbornness. When she finally saw her cabin through the trees, she wanted to cry with relief. Inside, she stripped off her frozen clothes, built up the fire, and made herself tea with shaking hands. Then she collapsed into her chair, wrapped in her quilt, and let the warmth seep back into her bones. She should have died out there, should have frozen or gotten lost or fallen and broken something. It had been reckless, dangerous, stupid. But she'd saved those pups. She and the wolf, working together, had saved them. Fern opened her journal, her hand still trembling from cold and exhaustion. "Dear Corey," she wrote, "today I learned something important. I learned that trying matters, even when it seems impossible. I learned that showing up matters, even in the worst conditions. I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to give up, even when giving up would be easier. I failed you once. I know that. When you needed me to fight for us, I didn't know how. But I'm learning now. 30 years too late. But I'm learning. The wolf trusted me today with the lives of her children. She asked for help and I gave it. We saved them together. I wish you could have seen it. I wish I could tell you about it face to face. I miss you, Corey. Every single day I miss you." She closed the journal and went to her dresser, pulled out the photograph of Corey with the baby fox, looked at it for a long time in the firelight. Then she pulled out the supplies she kept in the back of the drawer: paper, an envelope, a stamp. For 30 years she'd written letters to Corey but never sent them. They'd filled the journal, unsent words piling up like snow in a storm. Maybe it was time to actually reach out. Maybe it was time to try, even if it seemed impossible, even if he never responded, even if all she got back was silence. She didn't know how to find him, didn't know where he lived or even if he was still alive. But she could try, could hire another investigator, Could I make inquiries? Could put out feelers through the places they'd lived when he was young? The trying was what mattered. Vernon came the next morning, struggling through 2 feet of new snow. Fern met him outside, surprised to see him so soon after a storm. "Wanted to make sure you were all right," he said, climbing out of his truck. "That was a bad one." "I'm fine." Fern hesitated, then asked, "Vernon, do you remember a private investigator in Alamogordo? Fellow I hired years ago to look for Corey?" Vernon's eyebrows rose. "Sure, Tom something. Retired now, I think, but he might still have contacts." He studied her face. "You thinking of looking again?" "Maybe. I don't know. It's been a long time." "Never too late," Vernon said quietly. "If you want help, I can ask around. See what I can find out. I'd appreciate that." Vernon nodded. Then he reached into his truck and pulled out a manila envelope. "This came for you yesterday. Didn't want to leave it in the storm." Fern took the envelope, confused. She never got a mail except bills. Her name was written on the front in unfamiliar handwriting, neat, official-looking. The return address was a law office in Albuquerque. Her hand started shaking before she even opened it. Inside was a letter, typed on law office letterhead. Fern read the first line and had to sit down on the porch steps. "Dear Miss Maddra, I am writing on behalf of my client, Fern Maddra, who has retained my services to locate you." The world tilted. Fern read the line again, then again, unable to process what it meant. Corey was looking for her. After 30 years, her son was looking for her. The letter continued. "Mr. Maddra has recently learned that you may be residing in the Cloudcroft area and wishes to make contact. He has authorized me to share his current information with you and has expressed his hope that you might be willing to meet." Enclosed was a phone number, an address in Albuquerque, and a photograph, a recent one, showing a middle-aged man with gray at his temples and his father's eyes. He was standing with a woman and 2 teenage girls, all of them smiling. Corey had a family. Corey had daughters, and he wanted to see her. Fern's vision blurred. She was crying, tears running down her face faster than she could wipe them away. Vernon was saying something, asking if she was okay, but she couldn't answer. Could barely breathe. Her son. Her son was alive, had children, wanted to meet her. She looked up at Vernon, holding the letter in shaking hands. "He's looking for me," she whispered. "Corey's looking for me." Vernon's weathered face broke into a smile. "Well then," he said gently, "I guess you better call him back." Fern couldn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the lawyer's letter on the table beside her, the photograph of Corey and his family propped against the lamp where she could see it. Corey James Maddra, her son, alive and well and living in Albuquerque. A veterinarian, the letter had said. Of course he was. He'd always had that gift with animals, that gentle patience. The letter said he wanted to meet, that he'd been trying to find her for months, that he had things he wanted to say. Fern was terrified. What if he wanted to meet just to tell her face to face how much he hated her? What if those 30 years of silence had built a wall too high to climb? What if she'd waited too long and there was nothing left to salvage? But the photograph. She kept coming back to the photograph. Corey was smiling in it. His arm was around his wife. Teresa, the letter said her name was. His daughters, 15 and 17, nearly the age Corey had been when he left, stood on either side of them, and they looked happy. They looked like a family. Maybe he'd found peace. Maybe he'd built a life good enough that he could afford to look back without rage. Maybe there was room for forgiveness. The next morning, Fern walked to town. It was 12 miles on the Forest Service road, then another mile through Cloudcroft to the general store where Vernon worked part-time. The snow from the storm was already melting in the sunshine, turning the road to mud. She needed to call the number on the letter. Her cabin didn't have a phone. She'd never seen the point, but the general store had a payphone by the entrance. Cloudcroft at 9 in the morning was quiet. A few locals getting coffee at the cafe, a handful of cars on the main street. Fern felt exposed walking down the sidewalk, aware that people were looking at her. The hermit woman, come down from her mountain. She ignored the stairs and went straight to the general store. The payphone was ancient, covered in stickers and scratched plexiglass. Fern fed it quarters and dialed the number from the letter with shaking hands. It rang 3 times. Then a man answered. "Hello?" Fern's breath stopped. She knew that voice. Older, deeper than it had been, but unmistakable. "Corey," she said. Just his name. Nothing else would come out. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "Mum?" The word broke something open in Fern's chest. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Tears were streaming down her face in the middle of the general store parking lot, and she didn't care. "Mum, is that you?" "Yes," she managed. "Yes, it's me." Another silence, this one heavy with 30 years of things unsaid. Then Corey spoke, his voice rough. "I've been looking for you for 6 months. The lawyer said he found you in Cloudcroft. I couldn't believe it. You've been there this whole time. Not in town, up in the mountains. I built a cabin. I should have looked harder. I should have—" He stopped, started again. "There's so much I need to say to you. So much I need to apologize for." "No." Fern wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "No, Corey, I'm the one who—" "Can we meet?" he interrupted. "Please. I know it's been a long time, and I know I don't have any right to ask. But can we meet? Face to face?" Fern looked down at the phone, at her weathered hands holding the receiver. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'd like that." They arranged it for 3 days from now. There was a cafe in Cloudcroft, the Mountain View Diner. Corey would drive up from Albuquerque. They'd meet at noon. When Fern hung up, she had to sit down on the curb. Her whole body was shaking. She was going to see her son. After 30 years, she was going to see Corey. She was still sitting there when Travis Bonham walked past. Travis was local, a trapper in his late 50s who'd grown up in these mountains. He and Fern had history, not personal, but professional. He ran trap lines on federal land, mostly legal these days, though Fern had her suspicions. They'd clashed before when she'd found his traps set too close to hiking trails. He stopped when he saw her. Well, hermit woman's come to town. Must be a special occasion. Fern stood up, not liking the way he was looking at her. "Just making a phone call. Heard you had a visitor the other day. City hunter looking for that big black wolf. Said you ran him off your property pretty quick." Travis smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You wouldn't be hiding that wolf, would you, Fern?" "I'm not hiding anything. He was trespassing." "Funny thing about that wolf, there's a reward now. $5,000 for information leading to its location. Dalton Reese, that's the hunter. He's serious about finding it. Says it's the biggest wolf he's ever tracked." "Good luck to him," Fern said flatly. Travis stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know, I've been watching you. Seen you hiking up into the high country every day, always carrying supplies. You're feeding something up there, aren't you? And I'm betting it's not just the birds." Fern's stomach clenched, but she kept her face neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." Travis pulled something from his pocket, a crumpled piece of paper. He held it up so Fern could see. It was a hunting permit application, already filled out. and signed. See this? Official request to hunt the Black Wolf of Cloudcroft Ridge. All it needs is one more piece of evidence that the wolf is a threat, and it gets approved. Then Reese and I can hunt it legally. You're working with him? $5,000 reward, split 2 ways if I help him find it. That's good money. Travis's smile turned ugly. And you know what else? I heard about your boy. Heard he sent a lawyer looking for you. Must be nice, having family trying to reconnect after all these years. Fern went cold. How do you know about that? Small town, Fern. I work at the post office part-time. I see things, including that fancy letter from Albuquerque. He leaned in closer. Here's the thing. You don't deserve that. You drove your boy away with your meanness. Everyone knows it. You let your husband die and then blamed the kid for being upset about it. What kind of mother does that? The words hit like physical blows. Fern felt sick, but she forced herself to stand her ground. Get away from me. You think you can just hide up in your cabin and pretend the past didn't happen? You think saving some wolf is going to make up for what you did to your family? Travis shook his head. That wolf is going to be dead within a week, Fern. I'm going to find it, and I'm going to collect that reward, and there's nothing you can do about it. He walked away, leaving Fern standing in the parking lot with her hands clenched into fists. Vernon came out of the store and found her there. You okay? I saw Travis talking to you. He knows about the wolf, Fern said quietly. He's going to hunt it. Vernon's face darkened. Travis Bonham is a piece of work, but he's also all talk half the time. Don't let him get to you. He meant it, Vernon. He's working with that hunter, Reese. They're going to get a permit, and they're going to kill her. Her? Fern realized what she'd said. The wolf. It's a female. She has pups. Vernon was quiet for a moment. That changes things. Female with pups, she's not a threat to anyone. She's just trying to survive. Gretchen needs to know this. If I tell Gretchen, she'll want to see them. Document them. And that means people knowing where they are. Or, Vernon said carefully, it means having official evidence that the wolf isn't dangerous, that she's just a mother raising her young. That could protect her. Fern wanted to believe that, but she'd lived long enough to know that protection on paper didn't always translate to safety in the real world. Permits could be approved despite evidence. Accidents happened. People like Travis and Reese didn't care about rules when money was involved. I need to think about it, Fern said finally. She walked back to her cabin through the melting snow, her mind churning. 3 days until she saw Corey. 3 days to figure out how to protect the wolf. 3 days to somehow hold together the fragile new life that was trying to take root in the ruins of the old one. When she got home, she immediately hiked to the new den. The mother wolf was outside, lying in the sun while the pups played nearby. They were growing fast, their legs getting longer, their movements more coordinated. The black pup saw Fern first and came bounding over, tail wagging. It jumped up, putting its paws on her knees, demanding attention. Fern scratched behind its ears, her heart aching. Someone's coming for you, she told the mother wolf. Someone with bad intentions. I don't know how to stop them. The wolf's ears came forward. She stood up, sensing Fern's distress. I'm going to try, Fern continued. I'm going to do everything I can, but I need you to be careful. Stay hidden. Keep the pups close. Please. The wolf came closer, close enough that Fern could have touched her. They stood like that for a long moment, woman and wolf, both mothers, both trying to protect what they loved. Then Fern pulled something from her pocket. The silver compass, Corey's compass. She held it up to show the wolf, though she knew the wolf didn't understand what it was. My son is coming home, Fern said softly. After 30 years, he's coming back. And I'm terrified, because what if I can't find the words? What if I've forgotten how to be his mother? What if it's too late? The wolf watched her with those calm, yellow eyes. But I have to try, Fern continued, just like I have to try to protect you, because trying is all we can do, right? We show up. We do what we can. We don't give up, even when it seems impossible. She tucked the compass back in her pocket. The mother wolf touched her nose briefly to Fern's hand, then turned and herded her pups back toward the den. The sun was setting, painting the mountains gold and orange. A raven called from somewhere in the trees. Fern watched the wolves disappear into their shelter. Then she headed home through the gathering darkness, carrying the weight of all her failures and all her fragile hopes, knowing that the hardest tests were still to come. That night, she wrote in her journal, by lamplight. Dear Corey, in 3 days, I'm going to see you. I'm terrified. I don't know what to say, how to explain, how to make you understand. All I know is that I'm sorry. I've been sorry every day for 30 years, but sorry isn't enough. Sorry doesn't fix what I broke. There's a wolf I've been helping, a mother with pups. She reminds me of what I should have been, fierce, protective, willing to fight through anything to save her children. I failed at that once, but she's taught me it's never too late to try. I hope you can forgive me, but if you can't, I'll understand. Some things can't be fixed. Some wounds run too deep. But I'm going to try anyway, because you deserve that much, because I owe you that much, because you're my son, and I never stopped loving you, even when I didn't know how to show it. She closed the journal and looked at the photograph of Corey with his family. In 3 days, she'd see that face in person. In 3 days, she'd find out if redemption was possible. In 3 days, everything would change. Fern didn't sleep that night either. She lay in bed, running through every possible conversation she might have with Corey, every apology, every explanation. None of them felt adequate. How do you condense 30 years of regret into words that might matter? By dawn, she'd made a decision. She couldn't protect the wolf alone. Travis and Reese were too determined, too well-equipped. If she wanted to save the mother wolf and her pups, she needed help. She needed Gretchen. It went against every instinct Fern had developed over 3 decades of solitude. Asking for help meant admitting she couldn't handle things alone. It meant trusting someone with something precious. It meant vulnerability. But the wolf had trusted her with her pups during the storm. The least Fern could do was return that faith. She waited until 8 o'clock, then hiked down to where she could get cell service on the ridge. She'd gotten Vernon to give her Gretchen's number, just in case. Her hands shook as she dialed the ranger station on the old flip phone she kept for emergencies. Gretchen answered on the second ring. "Rain. It's Fern Maddra. I need to talk to you, in person." There was a pause. "About the wolf?" "Yes. I can be at your cabin in 2 hours." Fern went home and made coffee, then paced the cabin while she waited. This could go wrong in so many ways. Gretchen might decide the wolf needed to be relocated, might bring in more rangers, more people, might accidentally lead Travis and Reese right to the den, but she might also protect them, might have the authority and knowledge to keep them safe in ways Fern couldn't. Gretchen arrived exactly 2 hours later. She came alone, which Fern appreciated. They sat on Fern's porch with coffee between them, and Fern told her everything. The trap, the injured leg, the pups, the daily visits, the growing trust, the storm and the collapsed den. All of it. Gretchen listened without interrupting, her face neutral. When Fern finished, the ranger was quiet for a long moment. You should have told me sooner, she said finally. I know. I was afraid. Of me? Of what would happen if too many people knew. Of losing them. Gretchen nodded slowly. I get that. But here's the thing, Fern. You did exactly the right thing by freeing that wolf and treating her injury. That was humane. That was good wilderness ethics. But now we've got a situation. Travis Bonham and Dalton Reese are pushing hard for a hunting permit. They've filed complaints claiming the wolf has been threatening hikers and stalking camps. That's a lie. I know it is. But without evidence to counter their claims, my supervisor is going to approve the permit. He's under pressure from the hunting lobby, and a big wolf makes a good story. Gretchen set down her coffee cup. But if I can document that this is a nursing mother with young pups, that changes everything. Female wolves with pups are specifically protected. No hunting permit would be approved. You want to see them. I need to see them. I need photographs, official documentation, and I need it before that permit goes through, which could be any day now. Fern felt the familiar fear rising. What if she led Gretchen to the den and Travis followed? What if the documentation somehow made things worse instead of better? But she thought about the mother wolf, about the trust they'd built, about how the wolf had brought her pups to Fern during the storm, asking for help. If the wolf could trust, so could Fern. All right, she said. I'll take you to them. But we need to be careful. If Travis or Reese figure out where we're going, they won't, I'll make sure of it. Gretchen stood up. Can we go now? The hike to the den took an hour, Fern leading them by a circuitous route that avoided any trails Travis might watch. Gretchen was fit and sure-footed, keeping pace without complaint. She didn't talk much, just observed everything with the sharp attention of someone who'd spent her life in these mountains. When they got close, Fern made Gretchen wait while she went ahead. She didn't want the mother wolf to feel ambushed, threatened by a stranger's sudden presence. The wolf was at the den entrance, and she stood immediately when she saw Fern approach. Her ears went back when she noticed there was someone else behind Fern, but she didn't flee. It's okay, Fern said softly. She's here to help. I promise. The wolf's nose twitched, scenting the air. Fern gestured for Gretchen to come forward, slowly, carefully. The ranger moved like someone who understood wild things, her posture non-threatening, her movements deliberate. When she got close enough to see the wolf clearly, Fern heard her breath catch. My God, Gretchen whispered. She's magnificent. The mother wolf watched them both, tense but not panicked. The pups were wrestling near the den entrance, oblivious to the new human. The black one noticed Fern and came bounding over, tail wagging. Gretchen very slowly pulled out a camera, a professional one with a long lens. She started taking photographs from where she stood, not moving closer. The mother wolf tracked every movement but held her ground. The leg that was injured, Gretchen said quietly. Which one? Right rear. It's healed well. Gretchen took more photos, documenting the wolf from multiple angles, the pups playing, the den site. After about 20 minutes, she lowered the camera. This is exactly what I needed. Female with 3 healthy pups, clearly established den, showing no aggressive behavior. She looked at Fern. You did good work with that leg. That was a bad injury. She might have lost it without treatment. She saved herself. I just helped. They watched the wolves for another few minutes in silence. The mother wolf had relaxed enough to lie down again, keeping watch but no longer on high alert. The pups tumbled over each other, play-fighting over a stick. She trusts you, Gretchen observed. That's remarkable. I've been doing this work for 20 years, and I've never seen a wild wolf this comfortable around a human. We helped each other. She needed someone when she was hurt. I needed... Fern stopped, not sure how to finish. Purpose? Gretchen suggested gently. Connection? Fern nodded. Something like that. On the way back down, Gretchen explained what would happen next. She'd file an official report documenting a nursing female with pups. She'd include the photographs as evidence. That would be enough to deny any hunting permit and put additional protections in place. What about Travis and Reese? Fern asked. I'll make sure they know that hunting this wolf is now explicitly illegal. I'll also investigate those illegal traps you mentioned. If I can prove Travis set them, he'll lose his trapping license. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was better than Fern fighting alone. As they reached the cabin, Gretchen paused. Can I ask you something personal? Fern tensed. All right. Vernon mentioned you have a son, that he's been looking for you. How much did Vernon tell you? Just that. Nothing else. It's none of my business, really, but... Gretchen met her eyes. Taking care of that wolf, earning her trust, helping her raise those pups, that took patience and dedication and a kind of gentle strength. Those are the qualities of someone who knows how to nurture. I just wanted you to know that, whatever happened in the past, you clearly still have that in you. Fern's throat tightened. I'm meeting him in 2 days. My son. For the first time in 30 years. How do you feel about that? Terrified. Hopeful. Like I might throw up. Gretchen smiled. That sounds about right for a reunion 30 years in the making. For what it's worth, I hope it goes well. You deserve it. After Gretchen left, Fern sat on her porch and watched the sun track across the sky. 2 days, 48 hours until she faced Corey. She should be planning what to say, rehearsing apologies. But all she could think about was the wolf, about how the mother had trusted her enough to let a stranger document to her pups, about how sometimes trust meant risk, and risk meant the possibility of both loss and redemption. That night, Fern pulled out the clothes she'd worn to James's funeral, a simple black dress, now 3 decades old and probably out of style. She tried it on and was surprised to find it still fit, though it hung differently on her leaner frame. She looked at herself in the small mirror above her dresser and barely recognized the woman looking back. 62 years old. Grey hair she'd cut herself, uneven and practical. Weathered skin from 3 decades of sun and wind. Hands scarred from work and life. She looked like what she was, a woman who'd survived, but only just. Would Corey recognize her? Would he see his mother in this stranger's face, or just another old woman worn down by time and guilt? She took off the dress and hung it carefully. Tomorrow she'd walk to town, get Vernon to drive her to Cloudcroft proper, maybe buy something newer to wear. Or maybe not. Maybe she should just show up as herself. No pretense, no disguises. Just Fern, broken and trying. The next day she did hike to town, but not for new clothes. She went to the general store and used the payphone to call the lawyer's number again. Corey answered immediately, like he'd been waiting by the phone. Mum? Hi, Corey. I just wanted to make sure. You're still coming? Tomorrow? Yes, absolutely. I'm leaving Albuquerque first thing in the morning. I'll be at the diner at noon. He paused. Are you still okay with this? Yes. Nervous, but yes. Me too. She could hear the smile in his voice. I've thought about this moment for so long. What I'd say, how I'd apologize for leaving the way I did. You don't need to apologize, Corey. I'm the one who... Let's save it for tomorrow, he said gently. Let's say it all face to face. Okay? Okay. After they hung up, Fern stood in the parking lot for a long time, just breathing. Tomorrow. Tomorrow her son would be here. She walked home slowly, taking in the mountains she'd called home for so long, the ponderosa pines standing tall against the sky, the ravens calling to each other across the ridges, the clean smell of pine and snow and wind. This had been her sanctuary and her prison. She'd built a life here out of guilt and grief, had carved out a small existence where she didn't have to face what she'd lost. But the wolf had changed that, had shown her that isolation wasn't the same as peace. That connection, even when it was hard, was what made life worth living. Back at the cabin, Fern opened her journal one last time before the meeting. Dear Corey, tomorrow I'll see you. Tomorrow I'll stop writing these letters to a son who might never read them and start having real conversations with a man I barely know but have always loved. I don't know if you can forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I'm going to try to explain, try to help you understand. Try to show you that I never stopped being your mother, even when I didn't know how to reach you. The wolf taught me that. She showed me what it means to fight for your children, to risk everything to protect them, to trust even when trust seems impossible. I failed you once, but I'm here now, ready to try again, ready to do whatever it takes to be part of your life, if you'll let me. Tomorrow, I'll tell you this face to face. Tomorrow, everything changes. She closed the journal and set it aside. Then she pulled out the silver compass and polished it with a soft cloth until it gleamed. Tomorrow, she'd give it back to Corey. Tomorrow, she'd complete the circle that had broken 30 years ago. That night, she slept better than she had in weeks, and when she woke in the darkness before dawn, she heard it, a wolf's howl, rising from the high country, strong and clear. Not pain, not fear, just presence, just life. Fern stood at her window and listened until the sound faded into the morning. Then she began getting ready for the most important day in 3 decades, the day she'd get her son back, or the day she'd finally have to accept that some things, once broken, can't be fixed. Either way, she was ready. The morning of the meeting, Fern woke before dawn and couldn't go back to sleep. She made coffee, dressed in her cleanest clothes, not the funeral dress, just clean jeans and a flannel shirt that didn't have any holes. She brushed her hair and tried to tame it into something presentable, but it refused to cooperate. Finally, she gave up and pulled it back in a simple ponytail. The compass was in her jacket pocket. She'd bring it to the diner, give it back to Corey. Maybe it would help. Maybe it would say what words couldn't, that she'd kept it safe all these years, that she'd never stopped hoping he'd come home to claim it. She had hours before she needed to leave for town. Too restless to stay in the cabin, she decided to hike to the den one more time, just to check on the wolves, to make sure they were safe before she left for what might be the most important conversation of her life. The morning was crisp and clear, frost glittering on the pine needles. Fern's breath came in white puffs as she climbed toward the high country. Everything felt heightened, vivid. The blue of the sky, the sharp scent of pine, the crunch of frozen ground under her boots. She was about halfway to the den when she heard it. Gunshots, not the careful, spaced shots of target practice. Quick bursts, the sound of men shooting at something moving, and they were coming from the direction of the den. Fern ran. She didn't think, didn't plan, just ran, her lungs burning in the thin air, her legs pumping. She crashed through underbrush, not caring about noise, not caring about anything except getting there. She heard voices before she saw them, Travis's rough drawl and another man's voice, smoother, educated. Dalton Reese. They were at the den site, and they had rifles. Fern burst into the clearing and saw the mother wolf. She was between the hunters and the den, her lips pulled back in a snarl, her injured leg barely supporting her weight. She'd drawn the men away from the pups, was trying to lead them off. But they weren't following. They were setting up for a shot. "Get away from her!" Fern shouted. Both men spun around. Travis's face twisted into an ugly smile when he saw her. "Well, well. Come to watch? This is federal land, and that wolf is protected. Gretchen Rain documented her and her pups yesterday. You can't hunt her." "Funny thing," Dalton Reese said, raising his rifle. "We got a call this morning. Permit was approved. Wolf's been deemed a threat." "That's a lie. Got the paperwork right here." Travis patted his jacket pocket. "All legal and proper." Fern knew it was a lie, knew Gretchen would never have approved it. But it didn't matter. They weren't here because of permits or legality. They were here because they knew Fern cared about this wolf, and hurting what she cared about was punishment for destroying Travis's trapline, for chasing off Reese that first time. The mother wolf was still between them and the den, growling low. She was injured, exhausted from nursing pups, in no condition to fight or flee. But she wasn't backing down. Fern pulled out her own rifle from her pack and raised it. "I said get away from her." "You going to shoot us, Fern?" Travis laughed. "Over a wolf? If I have to." The standoff stretched. Fern's hands were shaking, but she kept the rifle steady, pointed at the ground between the two men. Not a threat yet, but close enough. The mother wolf watched everything, her yellow eyes tracking from Fern to the hunters and back. Then Fern heard the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines coming fast up the logging road. Sirens. Gretchen's truck appeared first, followed by two more Forest Service vehicles. Rangers piled out, all of them armed, all of them official. Gretchen walked straight up to Travis and Reese. "Put the rifles down. Now." "We have a permit," Reese said. "No, you don't. The permit application was denied yesterday. I have the documentation right here." She pulled out papers from her jacket. "But what you do have is a federal trespassing charge and a citation for illegal hunting. The wolf you're threatening is documented as a nursing female with dependent young. Hunting her is a federal offense." Travis's face went red. "You can't." "I can and I am. Now put down the weapons or you'll be charged with resisting a federal officer." Fern watched as both men slowly lowered their rifles. Two rangers moved in to collect the weapons. Gretchen walked over to where Fern stood, still holding her own rifle. "You okay?" Gretchen asked quietly. Fern nodded, not trusting her voice. "Vernon called me. Said he had a bad feeling. Said Travis was talking last night about coming up here this morning." Gretchen looked at the mother wolf, still standing guard over her den. "Looks like his timing was good." The wolf was watching the rangers with suspicion, but she could sense the shift in danger. She backed toward the den entrance, keeping her eyes on everyone. Travis was being escorted to one of the vehicles, still arguing. Reese was quieter, his expensive hunting gear looking ridiculous now as rangers searched him for additional weapons. "They said they had a permit," Fern said. "They were lying. Your permit was denied as soon as I filed my report, but they probably figured they could shoot the wolf and claim it was already approved, deal with the consequences later." Gretchen shook her head. "Some people will do anything for a trophy." Fern lowered her rifle, her whole body suddenly weak with relief. "Thank you. If you hadn't come..." "I know. But we did come." Gretchen touched her arm briefly. "The wolf's safe now. We'll be monitoring this area, making sure no one else tries anything. She and her pups are officially protected." The mother wolf had disappeared into the den. Fern could hear the pups inside, yipping, calling for their mother. Safe. They were safe. "Fern!" Gretchen said gently. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" Fern looked at her watch. It was 10:30. She had 90 minutes to get to Cloudcroft, to the diner, to Corey, her son. She'd almost forgotten in the chaos, almost let the wolf crisis consume everything else. But Corey was waiting, and she'd spent 30 years making him wait. She couldn't be late now. "Go," Gretchen said. "We'll handle this. You've got more important things to do." Fern nodded. She took one last look at the den, at the place where the mother wolf had taught her about trust and courage and trying again, despite fear. Then she turned and started down the mountain, toward town, toward the future, toward her son. Fern made it to Cloudcroft with 10 minutes to spare. Vernon had been waiting at the general store like they'd arranged, and he drove her the last few miles without asking questions about why she was out of breath, and her hands were shaking. "You want me to come in with you?" he offered when they pulled up to the Mountain View diner. "No, thank you, but I need to do this alone." Vernon nodded. "I'll be at the store. You call when you need a ride back." Fern sat in the truck for a moment after he drove off, looking at the diner. It was a modest place, chrome and glass, the kind of restaurant that had been serving the same menu for 40 years. Through the window, she could see the lunch crowd starting to arrive. And there, sitting in a booth by the window, was Corey. She recognized him instantly, despite the 30 years, despite the grey in his hair and the lines around his eyes. He had James's build, James's way of sitting with his hands folded on the table. But the eyes, when he looked up and saw her through the glass, the eyes were all hers, dark brown, deep-set, carrying the weight of too many memories. Their gazes met and held. Neither of them moved. Fern couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was real. Her son was 10 feet away, separated only by glass and air and 3 decades of silence. She made herself get out of the truck, made herself walk to the diner door, made herself push it open and step inside. Corey stood up as she approached. He was tall, taller than she remembered, though of course he'd still been growing when he left. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt, nice but not formal. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. They stood there for a long moment, a table between them, just looking. Fern tried to find words, but none came. She was crying and didn't care who saw. "Mum," Corey said, his voice breaking on the word. "Corey." And then somehow they were both moving around the table, and Fern had her arms around her son for the first time in 30 years. He was solid and warm and real, and he was crying too, his shoulders shaking under her hands. "I'm sorry," Fern said into his shirt. "I'm so sorry. I know. Me too." They held on for a long time while the diner bustled around them, other diners pretending not to stare. Finally, they pulled apart and sat down across from each other, both of them wiping their eyes, both of them trying to smile through tears. A waitress came by, poured coffee, left menus. They ignored the menus. "You look good," Corey said. "Older, but good. Strong. I live alone in the mountains. It keeps you strong or it kills you." Fern's voice was shaky. "You look like your father." "I know. Teresa says the same thing." He pulled out his wallet and showed her a better photo of his family, his wife, dark-haired and smiling, and his 2 daughters, one with Corey's eyes and one with James's nose. "They're beautiful. You have a beautiful family." "They wanted to come, but I thought maybe we should do this alone first. Make sure—" He stopped, started again. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me, if you'd be angry that I waited so long." "Angry? Corey, I'm the one who should be asking that. After what I said to you, after I let you leave, you didn't let me leave. I chose to go. I was 17 and angry and hurting, and instead of dealing with it, I ran. Corey's hands were wrapped around his coffee cup, so tight his knuckles were white. I blamed you for Dad's death, because it was easier than admitting I was angry at him for dying, for leaving us. I said terrible things, and I've regretted them every day since. You were a child who just lost his father. What I said was worse. I was the adult. I should have been stronger. They were both trying to take all the blame, both trying to absolve the other. Fern realized they could do this for hours and never get anywhere. She pulled the compass from her pocket and set it on the table between them. Corey stared at it. You kept it. Of course I kept it. I kept everything. Your room is exactly how you left it, back in the old house before I moved. I packed it all, brought it with me to the cabin. Every report card, every drawing, every shirt that still smelled like you. I kept all of it because letting go would mean accepting you weren't coming back. I wanted to come back, Corey said quietly. So many times. But the longer I stayed away, the harder it became. I was ashamed. I'd left so dramatically, said such awful things. How do you come back from that? How do you just knock on the door and say, sorry for disappearing for 30 years? The same way I'm sitting here now, I guess. You just do it. You show up and hope it's not too late. Corey picked up the compass, turned it over in his hands. Dad gave me this, so I could always find my way home. I left it behind because I was so angry I wanted to hurt you. But really, I was just hurting myself. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry I let my own grief swallow me up instead of helping you with yours. I'm sorry for all the years we lost. I'm sorry I stayed away so long. I'm sorry I let pride and shame keep me from reaching out. I'm sorry it took my oldest daughter asking about her grandmother for me to finally get the courage to look for you. They were crying again, both of them, but smiling too. Fern reached across the table and took her son's hand, the same hand that had once been small enough to fit completely in hers, that had gently held injured birds and built model rockets and written her Mother's Day cards. Can we start over? Corey asked. Not forget what happened, but move forward from here? I'd like that more than anything. They talked for 3 hours. The lunch rush came and went. They ordered food they barely touched. Corey told her about his life, how he'd worked construction for years, saved money, eventually gone to veterinary school, how he'd met Teresa at a clinic where they both worked, how his daughters were fierce and funny and already talking about colleges. Fern told him about the cabin, about learning to survive alone, about the long, quiet years. She told him about the wolf, about the trap and the healing and the pups, about how saving the wolf had somehow started saving her too. You always did have a way with injured things, Corey said, echoing what he'd said on the phone. I learned that from you, you know. How to be patient with scared animals, how to earn their trust. I thought I'd lost that, lost everything that made me a decent mother. You never lost it. You just lost yourself. For a while. Corey squeezed her hand. But you found your way back. That's what matters. When they finally left the diner, the sun was low in the sky. Corey walked Fern to Vernon's truck, which had been parked outside for the last hour, waiting. Come to Albuquerque, Corey said. Meet Teresa and the girls. Be part of our lives. Please. I'd like that very much. And we'll visit you too. The girls will love the cabin, love the mountains. Maybe if the wolf is comfortable with it, they could see her from a distance. Maybe, if she allows it. They hugged again, long and tight. When they pulled apart, Corey was holding the compass. "Thank you for keeping this safe," he said. "It was always yours?" "No." Corey pressed it back into her hands. "I think it's yours now. You're the one who needed to find her way home. And you did." Fern closed her fingers around the cool metal. "We both did," she said softly. She watched Corey drive away, watched until his car disappeared down the mountain road. Then she climbed into Vernon's truck and let him drive her back up to the forest, back to the cabin, back to the life that was no longer just about surviving, but about living, about being part of something larger than grief and guilt, about finally, after 30 years, coming home. A month later, Fern stood on her porch watching Corey's truck navigate the rutted Forest Service road. Teresa was driving, Corey in the passenger seat, and in the back were his daughters, Emma and Sophie, 15 and 17, bundled in winter coats and brimming with curiosity. It was their third visit. The first had been brief, just a day trip to see the cabin and meet the grandmother they'd only recently learned existed. The second had been longer, a weekend where they'd hiked the lower trails and talked late into the night around the fire. This time they were staying for Thanksgiving, a week away. The truck pulled up and the girls tumbled out, already talking over each other. "Grandma Fern, can we see the wolves today? Is there snow yet? Can we build a snowman? Mum says you have a root cellar. Can we see it?" Fern smiled, still getting used to being Grandma Fern, still marveling at the noise and energy these girls brought into her quiet life. Teresa hugged her warmly while Corey unloaded bags from the truck bed. "We brought supplies," Teresa said. "Figured we'd cook a proper Thanksgiving dinner together. Hope your oven works." "It works. Might be a tight fit for 7 people in the cabin, but we'll manage." 7. Because Vernon and Gretchen were coming too. Fern had invited them almost without thinking, and they'd both accepted immediately. A month ago, the idea of hosting Thanksgiving dinner for 6 people would have been unthinkable. Now it felt right. The wolves, Fern told the girls, would have to wait. She'd been visiting the mother wolf and pups regularly, but always alone, and always carefully. The pups were growing fast, nearly 4 months old now, ranging farther from the den, practicing hunting skills with small prey. The mother wolf's leg had healed completely. She could run again, could hunt, could protect her young. But she still allowed Fern close, still waited, near the old den site when Fern came by. Still let the pups approach Fern with their puppy exuberance, though they were getting less puppy-like by the day. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Fern hiked up with Corey. Just the 2 of them. An early morning walk through fresh snow. She wanted him to see the wolves, wanted him to understand this thing that had brought her back to herself. They approached carefully, quietly. The mother wolf was lying on a sunny rock, the 3 pups wrestling nearby. When she saw Fern, her ears came forward in recognition. When she saw Corey, she stood, alert but not aggressive. "It's okay," Fern said softly. "This is my son. He's safe." The wolf watched Corey for a long moment. Then, incredibly, she lay back down. The pups noticed the new human and came over to investigate, bold as ever. The black one, still the bravest, sniffed Corey's boots with great interest. Corey knelt down slowly. The pup allowed him to extend a hand, sniffed it, then licked his fingers. Corey's face broke into a smile that made him look 12 years old again. "She's beautiful, Mum. They all are." "She saved me," Fern said quietly. "She needed help and I gave it. And somehow in helping her, I found my way back to helping myself, back to believing I could be more than just—" She gestured at the mountains around them. "This, alone and hidden." You were never meant to be alone, Corey said. He was still watching the pups, his voice gentle. You were meant to be exactly this. Patient. Kind. Strong enough to help, but wise enough to let go when necessary. They stayed for an hour, sitting in the snow while the wolves went about their business. The mother wolf eventually approached Fern, pressing her nose briefly against Fern's hand in that gesture of trust and affection she'd developed. Then she gathered her pups and led them deeper into the forest, off to hunt, off to live their wild lives. Fern and Corey walked back down the mountain together. They talked about small things, the girls' school activities, Teresa's work at the clinic, plans for Christmas. Easy conversation, the kind that comes when the hard things have already been said and forgiven. Thanksgiving Day arrived cold and clear. Vernon showed up early with pies he'd bought from the bakery in Cloudcroft. Gretchen arrived with wild turkey she'd hunted herself and vegetables from the Cloudcroft market, the cabin filled with people, and noise, and the smell of cooking food. Fern stood at her window while the others were occupied, looking out at the forest she'd called home for 30 years. The mountains were the same, eternal, unchanging, but everything else was different. She was different. Behind her, Emma was asking Vernon about the old days in Cloudcroft. Sophie was helping Teresa with the turkey. Corey was explaining to Gretchen how to treat frostbite in domestic animals. Normal conversation. Family conversation. When dinner was ready, they crowded around Fern's small table, chairs pulled from every corner of the cabin. Vernon said grace, his weathered voice steady. They ate and talked and laughed, and Fern felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Belonging. After dinner, after the dishes were done and the sun had set, they sat around the fire. Emma asked Fern to tell the story of the wolf again, and Fern obliged, adding details the girls hadn't heard before. The trap, the fear, the decision to help, despite the danger. You were brave, Grandma, Sophie said. I was terrified, Fern corrected gently. But sometimes being brave means doing the right thing, even when you're terrified. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, the girls in sleeping bags by the fire, Corey and Teresa in the loft, Vernon and Gretchen having driven back to town, Fern sat alone by the dying fire and pulled out her journal. Dear Corey, she wrote, then stopped. She didn't need to write to him anymore. He was sleeping 15 feet away. Tomorrow they'd have breakfast together, would make plans for Christmas, would continue building the relationship they'd both thought was lost forever. Instead, she turned to a fresh page and wrote something different. Dear James, I finally did it. I got our boy back. He's here, in the cabin I built from guilt and grief, and he's brought his family. We're going to be okay. It took 30 years, but we're going to be okay. I wish you could see him. He's a veterinarian, just like you always said he'd be. He's patient and kind, and he has your smile. The girls have his eyes, which means they have mine, which means a piece of all of us continues. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry for all the ways I failed. But I think maybe I'm finally learning how to forgive myself, how to accept that I did my best, even when my best wasn't enough. The wolf helped me understand that. She fought for her children despite her injury, despite the fear, despite everything stacked against her. She didn't give up, and neither can I. I'll always miss you, but I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. She closed the journal and set it aside. Outside, a wolf howled from the high country, the mother, calling to her pups, keeping her family together in the darkness. Fern listened until the sound faded, then banked the fire and climbed the ladder to her loft. Below, she could hear Corey's breathing, steady and peaceful. Her son was home. Her family was here. The wolves were safe in the mountains, wild and free and thriving. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days ahead, still conversations they'd need to have, still wounds that were healing but not healed. But they had time now. They had each other. They had tomorrow. Fern pulled the quilt up to her chin, the same quilt she'd made 30 years ago from pieces of her broken life, now worn soft with use. Each square still represented a memory. James's shirt, Corey's baby blanket, a fragment of her wedding dress. But now those memories didn't just mean loss. They meant foundation. They meant the love that had brought her here, to this moment, to this second chance. She fell asleep, thinking about the mother wolf and her pups somewhere in the darkness, about trust and courage, and the terrifying, necessary work of trying again, about how sometimes the thing you save ends up saving you back, about how 30 years of silence could be broken by one word, Mom, spoken with forgiveness and hope, about how it's never too late to find your way home, as long as you're brave enough to take the first step into the unknown. Outside, the mountains stood eternal under a sky full of stars. Inside the cabin, a grandmother slept peacefully while her family breathed quietly around her. And somewhere in the high country, a black wolf and her 3 pups curled together in their den, warm and safe and free. All of them, at last, exactly where they belonged.